Hey everyone, welcome to BEARTH Podcast. I'm Ash. I want to introduce you to my guest today, Shelby Yaffe, who is a poet, an activist, a young woman who has gone on an incredible journey to not only embody and embrace her identity, but is speaking out for the rights of others. And I want to have a conversation with her today about where we are, especially because it's Pride Month. And we need to hear the voices of a younger generation who are commanding and demanding change.
I was born and raised in the Denver area, smaller at the time suburb outside of Denver. And I was born into essentially an evangelical Pentecostal home. And I also went to Christian school, and that school was attached to the church that I was a part of. And that was, basically K through 12 with a small little blip in the middle where I actually got kicked out of my Christian school. I was not a compliant kid from a fairly young age. I didn't really, it didn't mesh with me, the religion that I was being fed and given. I was 9 years old the first time I asked a really big theological question in Sunday school. I was just like, if God created all of us and he knows everything about us, why did he create hell if he knew people were going to go there? And they didn't really have an answer for me. And that was kind of the day when I knew that something was wrong with the religion I was being fed. I was inundated with it. It was really just my whole life.
Was there any part of the faith that you felt like you did connect with at all during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a tattoo of a cross on my left forearm. I love Jesus, always connected with him above all else. It was the extraneous stuff that I wasn't interested in, the rules and the sins that people said were the worst sins, like being gay, which of course I turned out to be. So yeah, I really let all that fall by the wayside pretty early on, but Jesus was held very, very dearly to me.
Let's talk about your journey. For you, what was that internal journey like?
So I was 12 years old the first time I knew that I had a crush on a girl at school. And it was an uncomfortable experience for me because I knew somewhere in my heart that it was okay, but I also had been taught all my life that it was wrong. So my first initial experience with same-sex attraction was very negative because I was afraid of what I was feeling. As I got older, I came out to people as bi, close friends and people like that. And that wasn't quite right. That didn't quite capture my identity, but I was with men and I just kept so much inside. I was in the church. I had a daughter when I was 20 years old and I was taking her to church, and I was, in really serious relationships with a lot of men, but I had a really deep struggle with an eating disorder. And through my eating disorder, I think was really suppressing my sexuality. I was using it as a self-punishment tool to kind of beat that out of me. And when I went to treatment, when I was 24, inpatient treatment for the first time for my eating disorder, it all came flooding forward. It didn't matter any preconceived notions I had about sexuality and what I had been doing with my life before that point. It all came to the front when I was really in recovery. So if I hadn't gone to eating disorder treatment, I can guarantee you right now I would not have come out to my family, to my friends, to my community as a lesbian, and I wouldn't be married to my wife. So for me, it was really all about recovery. I mean, through my recovery program, I was able to come to terms with who I really am as a person.
I went to a church in Colorado Springs that unfortunately was very harsh against LGBT people. Mm-hmm. And the pastor then later comes out as bisexual, that there were drugs involved in the secrets that he was keeping. And of course, there's no wrongness at all in our sexual beings in our sexuality, but it was the lies that he kept and the shame that was promoted and put into the sermons, that was put into the teachings, that was put into the culture. You talked about sort of, going into rehab and all of that shame, all of that stuff coming up out of you that had been buried for so long. Can you talk a little bit about the shame that you went through, that you felt, the thoughts that went through your mind, the kinds of things within that shame that you dealt with growing up in a cultivated culture of shame around your very body, your very attraction?
I was raised believing that gay people could not go to heaven, that they were living in sin, essentially too severe for Jesus to forgive. And no matter how easy it was for me to see that that was ridiculous for other people, for me, it was too much. The shame was like, it was daily, it was assaultive, it was every time I had feelings for a woman, it was just this overwhelming confusion, disgust, and I would fall in love with these women and sometimes even tell them, sometimes there were even relationships that were kind of underground, but the shame that I experienced in those relationships was so palpable and real that I couldn't even keep up a connection with a woman at that time, just because I was so hard on myself in my head, and so convinced that somehow what I was doing was wrong. And it took me forever to break out of that, because when you're a kid and someone is telling you this thing literally puts people in a place where you will be tortured for all eternity, it's really hard to just turn that off. It's really hard to just say, even if you don't believe in hell, to not allow that shame to kind of creep in.
We've definitely created a society, a belief system in which, actually a pastor friend of mine who talked about, we created a religion of division in the first place. When you create heaven and hell, you're creating the ultimate division, that you're telling children at the end of the world, at the end of life, there's this huge division that happens between heaven and hell. All the bad go into one, all the good go into one, all the perceived good go into one. And therefore, while there's talk of grace, there's no practice of grace. You took it into your body, literally, and punished your body for it in a really drastic and terrible way. How did all of this shame translate into the relationship with food?
I was technically diagnosed as bulimic. There were a lot of different behaviors throughout the course of my illness that were horrible, things that I would do to my body. And ultimately, I think eating disorders are so unbelievably complicated, because it was about the way I looked. It was about the fact that society told me that as a woman, I had to be smaller, I had to shrink, I had to take up less space. So that, of course, affected that journey. Religion did me no favors as far as telling me that I was wrong and bad for the things that I was feeling. Because, of course, when you perceive yourself as wrong and bad, why would you take care of yourself? There was no part of me that thought that I was worthy of being cared for. And I would jump into relationships with people who didn't care for me, to kind of affirm for myself from an early age that I was not worth anything. It was like I believed that so deeply that I mistreated myself on that level all the time. But it transformed a lot, because I also have the diagnosis of PTSD, and my eating disorder became my way to deal with everything. Not just my feelings about my sexuality, but also past trauma. And it became my confidant and my friend, and very warped relationship in my life. But yeah, as far as my sexuality goes, it was so unbelievably linked. I had that first feeling for a woman when I was 13, for a girl. And then when I was 13, my eating disorder developed. I see so many parallels in the disease process and then in how I was growing into myself and my sexuality, it's just, they were definitely linked in every way, you know.
You're definitely part of a generation that has such a greater awareness, I think, that is really inspiring on an incredible level, because these are not things that we have often taught or think about on a regular basis. And I do see the shift, you know, into sort of the soul level. What do you have to do now in your relationship with food to be deeply conscious, because you understand how it has been linked to your shame in the past?
This is a daily battle, right? Shame does not melt away overnight. It did not leave me the day that I came out of the closet. It stays with you. It has staying power. So every day I have to wake up and just be like, I am worthy. I deserve to eat. I deserve nourishment. And that is something, that is the core of what I learned that was most important to me and most impactful for me, is that, you know, bad religion taught me that I was wrong and bad and needed to be fixed. And I am good and I am whole and I do not need to be fixed, you know, and that is something that I believe on such a deep level now, that it's very different for me approaching the eating disorder, approaching my way of treating myself, but the eating disorder is still there. You know, it still creeps in every time I have feelings that are difficult to deal with, and kind of taps me on the shoulder and gives me some choices. And I just need to continue to work every day to choose the other road. You know, it's really important to me to be well now for my daughter, for my wife, and just to be myself. I actually like being myself now, which I think is the biggest difference.
Talk about the relationship. I mean, obviously you've had to navigate, you have a wife and you have a daughter. Both of them have seen you, you know, navigate through a very unique journey that you had to step into in a very complicated way.
Yeah, I was kind of millennial about this. I took a letter and I put it in a Facebook message and I sent it off to like 35 people in one night and just said, hey, here's what's going on. I'm a lesbian. I listed basically all of the concerns that I think people might have about it, you know, and I broke it down for people. I sent it to everyone who was important to me except for my mother. And my mother and I have had a very interesting and difficult relationship, a beautiful relationship at the end of the day, but very interesting and very difficult. And she was the one that I did not want to know. She was the one person that I was like, if my mom knows, my life will be over, because she will, you know, cast me out. She will disown me and I won't be able to make it through that, because I do love my mother very much. But over time, even though I didn't come out to her formally, the information sort of bled from other family members to her. And I finally approached her about it when I told her about my wife, who was then my girlfriend, and said, I'm bringing her to Thanksgiving. And my mom said, okay, you know, and it's been a ride dealing with my family's reactions to all of this. My friends have been incredible, supportive. I have queer friends in my friend group now, which is wonderful. But my family was the hard part. And I cannot tell you what a beautiful miracle it felt like when on my wedding day, I saw my family coming up to the building where we were about to take pictures, and my mom was wearing rainbow shoelaces in her Converse. And that moment changed my life, like, honestly, because it was like her handing me this small support, like, this is what I have to give you, you know, like, maybe she doesn't completely affirm my identity, maybe there are still difficulties with her and the rest of my family, but like this olive branch of these shoelaces that was like, this is what I have to give. So yeah, with my family, it's been a process, but at this point, I think everyone has been nothing but kind to my wife, you know, my evangelical, basically Pentecostal family, yeah, is probably still displeased. The hardest part has been walking into every space with my wife, knowing that my family would be happier if she was a man. I think that has been the sticking point for me, where it's still hard, you know, but I have understood now that I need to unburden myself from all of that. Like, that's not mine, and I do not need to take on shame from them. There were no fights. It was so fascinating. There were no fights. There were no blow up arguments. There was no yelling. When I came out, I was actually really blessed to have a family that fell silent. And I actually really appreciate that was their effort, even though I think their churches, for example, would have not been pleased with their reaction, perhaps because they should have been more stern or whatever it was, you know, but I think they actually did a fairly decent job.
What would you say to someone who, because maybe the silence was helpful for you, or there may be a lot of other, particularly younger LGBTQ kids from Christian homes who the silence frightens them. How would you advise them to approach that? Because even though you didn't have the angry fights, I'm sure there's been tough conversations. How does a young person approach that conversation with a family they already know doesn't accept their identity?
Yeah. I mean, my greatest advice for myself that I still give myself is remember that you can be your own family, that you can find other family to support you out in the world. And I take that knowledge into my conversations with my family, knowing that I am strong, knowing that I am supported, that the universe, you know, made me to be this way. No one can take that truth from me. But yeah, I mean, it's not easy it's not even easy to have the silence. And so for anyone who is afraid of how not easy it's going to be, I would say, you know, that support from the outside is definitely needed, and just enter into every space as your full self. And anyone who is going to cast you out because of that is not for you. And unfortunately, I know several people for whom that means family members, you know, mothers and fathers. And I have found that even knowing that they don't accept me, I'm able to accept their non-acceptance by remembering that they're human. And that's another thing I would tell everybody is, like, these people who are stuck in religion are of an older set of ideas, and they have been brainwashed just as much as you were. That's something that is difficult to act out, like compassion for the people who are oppressing you. But for me, at least in my family dynamics, that was the best that I could do, was just to say, I still love you, but...
Well, that's the thing is love, true love ends up bringing a sense of hope. And, you know, even though you had to sort of accept their non-acceptance, there was still hope, and it brought back exactly what has been beneficial for you. I wanted to step back. There was a question I wanted to ask you. You said that when you sent out your big letter, you said, I wanted to address people's, quote, concerns. So what concerns did you think, or did you project that people would have?
I was 100% certain that people were going to say, you are not a lesbian. There's no way. Because I was, at least externally, very boy crazy. And I mean that until I was about 23 years old. I was constantly in relationships with men. They were very serious at times. I was engaged once, but I explained to them, I broke it down, you know, I have been denying myself with such ferocity that I was going in the opposite direction of where I truly wanted to be, just to prove to myself, you know, that I was straight or that I was normal. And so I was afraid that people were just not going to believe me at all.
I'd love to, I know that you are doing a lot of different things right now. I kind of want to give you the floor to be able to share what you're feeling in the current spaces that we're in. It's Pride Month. Black Lives Matter is moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you've been very vocal about both of those things in a pretty significant way.
I've seen in a few places Pride Month isn't canceled. It's Pride Wrath Month now. And that's how I feel. I am getting really absorbed in Black Lives Matter. I would really recommend that anyone listening to this, please donate to your local Black Lives Matter chapter or the NAACP. It is so important to get into this movement right now. It should go without saying that everyone deserves the right to life and justice. And I have truly been outraged. I, have been supporting Black Lives Matter for the last 7 years. I think it's an incredible time to be living in, and we need to absolutely just fall back and let Black people lead the way, let Black women lead the way. So yeah, that's what's been really on my heart lately. I am working on a book of poetry, and I would love to read one of my poems. Yeah. Okay. This is a piece that has not yet been published, and it's called Butcher. 1. When you starve the body, it goes for the muscle. Even the body has better taste than to eat the fat first. The curve of thighs wasted away, strength of arms slowly consumed by Butcher. Selected carefully for taste and size. Butcher watches heart beating in chest, sees forbidden fruit, sees juicy and alive. Butcher cannot tell the difference between vital and disposable. He cuts from heart in slivers. Brain fogs, eyes go gossamer. The rush of holy blood drained from veins. 2. When you starve the body, you do not see Butcher. You do not know what you do not know. You only stare at convex pain of belly, danger of breasts, shame of all things supple and unruly. In mirrors and windows you grab at fat, wishing to rip it away from bones. You chase bones, doorknobs of hips, elegance of ribs, exposed even beneath a shroud of cotton, bronze bathing suit fantasies filling you with future. You are so full on future. You cannot feel the lion that growls in your guts, wild thunder that calls for you to stop. You are so deaf with hunger, you cannot hear the cries, the whimpers of a child within you that has not been fed in days. 3. When you starve the body, you die. You are gone, gone. Dead to world, dead to work, or dead in ground. Box lined with pink satin, gentle on the flake of taut skin. If ground is not yet ready to swallow you, shadow will still sit at the banquet table, fork in left hand, knife in right, waiting for what's left of you to arrive on platters and plates. You will not flee the slaughter. The body that was beaten, whipped to bloody mess, now it fights back, armed to white teeth, and now you are its food. Now darkness cannot wait anymore to bring you to the raw of its lips.
If Shelby's story resonated with you, if it spoke to you, if it confronted you, if it challenged you in any way, I encourage you to check out her work, her writing, her poetry, and I will put a link to her website in the description box below. So please check that out and follow her. She has an incredible story, and she's an incredible young mind that is part of a generation trying to change the world. I'm so excited that we have this opportunity to speak together today. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have conversations, please put them in the comment section. We'd love to hear them. Share this episode. Take it to your friends, to your family, to your people. Be encouraged, be challenged, and let's continue to break open what we need to do to change the mentality in a world that has, for so long, hurt so many young men and women, shamed them in their own bodies for who they loved. That has to change. That's not okay. Thank you for being with us today. And for now, I leave you there, and may you live and move and have your being. Cheers.